for now, I'd really like for you to just, introduce yourself to us. Let us know a little bit about you and kind of your background, and just highlight yourself. Here's the time to ring your own bell, in other words.
Okie dokie. Well, I got my start in medical education at UT Medical Branch in Galveston, and I had just finished my master's as a reading specialist when they hired me there. So I was really glad to hear Rachel earlier emphasizing the importance of reading and learning to read critically. And what we found was that students had obviously done really well in their undergrad, right? Or they wouldn't be in med school, but they just sometimes hit a wall whenever they began med school. And part of it was because of the amount of reading that they were required. So I also work with undergrads, and I often ask them, how many pages per week are you assigned? And it's usually in the 50 to 100 pages. I've heard as much as 200 pages of reading in undergraduate. But there was research that was done in the late 1980s that showed med students were required to read about 1,000 pages every week. And so you can imagine, wow, right, that the strategies that you used in undergrad that worked at 100 or 200 pages a week just started to fall apart with the requirements to get through med school. And so that's when my co-author, Dr. Jean Kelman, and I started looking at the research to see how can we help these smart students, take in more information, put it in their long-term memory, and then be able to pull it back out again. And we found that there really wasn't any system that had been developed for med students. And so we went back to the literature and found bits and pieces, and then put together a system of study for students in professional school.
Oh, wow. So this is pretty big stuff here we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So you mentioned that a lot of students have transition issues between undergrad and medical school. And I'm just wondering, in your experience, is that pretty common?
It is, and it's interesting because there's a lot written about transition into the profession itself, but because I don't know this for a fact, but I have a feeling that because professional school, med school, looks like their undergraduate, that people are expecting the experience to be the same, so their expectations are that I'll be able to do more of what I was able to do in undergrad. But then, as you well know, with the volume and the pace of med school, that's what takes them off guard.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what can a student do as an undergraduate that will help prepare them for what they're going to face as a med student? This is always a big question. My experience is students always want to know, what can I do? What can I do? What can I do to be better and better prepared and better able to succeed in medical school? And what can they do as an undergrad that would really help them in that process?
Well, I just happen to have written a book for those very students, and it's the same strategies that we use to teach the med students. And what we've done is we use examples that they'll be coming across whenever they're still in college, but it's the very same strategies that we used with our med students. And the steps are learning how to prepare for lecture. And I mean that cognitively, not just, looking good for class that day, but preparing academically for the class. And then how to make lecture really count while you're sitting there listening, if it's streamed or whether it's live. How can you really get the most out of that time? And then after you've gotten a lot out of your lecture period, what do you do with that information? How can you keep it fresh? How can you put it in your long-term memory? And then how can you keep pulling it out so the memories become stronger instead of fading?
Yeah, that's one thing that cramming for a test doesn't do very well, right?
Yeah.
And this is a big issue in undergraduate school amongst undergraduate students, is this mentality that I'm going to cram the night before the test.
Right.
I'm going to do well on the test. And then what happens to that information?
Right. Exactly. And I call that an heroic effort. So you give it your all, there at the last minute. And again, that's one of the strategies that starts to break down in med school because it's not sustainable. You can do a heroic effort every once in a while, but you can't do it day in and day out and still have good physical health and good mental health, like we've been talking about earlier today.
Right, absolutely. And so when a student, I used to have students who would try to get the books before med school and start going through the books before med school and start reading ahead and stuff like that. Is that something you suggest, or probably not a good idea?
Well, it depends on partly their rationale, but also their approach, because we do teach students to prepare before they go to lecture. And so if they were looking at it like that, if they were thinking, I'm going to learn everything in this textbook before med school starts, probably not the best approach. But do you want to know what the vocabulary is that the professor is going to be using? Yes, you do. Otherwise, you're going to be lost during lecture. Do you want to know where the class is going to go so you can be engaged and you can ask intelligent questions? Yes, you want to do those things. Absolutely.
Absolutely. That's wonderful. Now, I noticed that we're going to put up here, you have a website, vitalstudyskills.com. Tell us a little bit about your website and what a student can find there.
We're actually transitioning and updating it. So what they find there will probably not be the same as it will be in a few weeks. But there we have the first chapter of 6 Steps to College Success can be downloaded. So if students want to, get a little taste of our writing style and what they're going to find in the book, that's available there. We have links to the other books that we've written. These strategies have been used with students in many of the different health sciences. And so we have a book for med students and we have a book for nursing students, as well as the one for pre-meds.
Awesome. Very good. Well, our co-founder MAPT has joined us, Rachel Grubbs.
Hello, guys. Sorry, a little hiccup about who was supposed to be where, but I'm here.
No worries. We're just chatting about success in undergrad and how to transition that into success as a strong medical student, and talking a little bit about what students can find on the vitalstudyskills.com website. And I'm very interested in these 6 steps. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and I'll see if I can get some of them on the web.
Yeah, I think back one. Yeah.
There we go. All right, Rachel, I'm going to let you handle it.
Okay, cool. Presenter. Please stand by while I get my tech organized. Okay, how's that look? There we go. So Kathleen, thanks so much for being here today and for chit-chatting with Scott while it was funny, my schedule said I had a break, and then I was like, well, I'll see what's going on. And I was like, wow, Kathleen's session looks really popular. And I was like, wait, aren't I doing that?
That name sounds familiar, huh?
I feel like I have her slides. Yeah. So yeah, I appreciate everyone bearing with me. So since I'm catching up, I assume we kind of already talked a little bit about who you are, kind of what you do. Do you want to go through some of these slides together? You can just sort of let me know when you're ready to get on to each next one, and I'll click it. And then I think we left plenty of time for questions from the audience as well, right?
Go ahead and just click through the next couple if you would. So we've talked about so much to learn, so little time. Let's stop on this one for a minute because the strategies that we've come up with obviously address learning the content, but some of the steps to college success have to do with body management, which have to do with sleep, nutrition, and exercise. And then mind management, which has to do with how you talk to yourself and your ability to focus and really be able to pay attention to what's in front of you. And so all of those are addressed in our study system.
Okay, cool. That's great. I love to see the body management. I think that that's so important to success.
It is.
Take care of your wellness.
Exactly. And some of the sessions that I've sat in earlier today that you were part of, where we talked about the good mental health, and part of good mental health is good physical health, right? It's all so intertwined.
Right. Yeah. And even if you're thinking about it from like the neurochemistry part of it, right? Like, what are you doing to get, you know, either oxytocin or your serotonin or your dopamine or your endorphin, right? Like, what things are you doing to make that happen in your body and your mind?
Exactly.
All right. Next slide.
Yes, please.
All
So
right.
this boils down the research that Dr. Jean Kelman and I came up with, and these are strategies that we teach our pre-med students, our med students, and our vet students, all the ones that I work with, and it's preparing for lecture. And I briefly talked about that before, but that'll do two things for students. It'll either activate prior knowledge if you already know something about the topic, or if you know nothing about the topic, it's going to start building that mental framework for you. So that's important before you go to lecture. And then to give students a purpose for reading, instead of just pages turning. I had a student one time say to me, pages turning does not equal students learning. And I was like, ooh, that's good. So just because pages are turning doesn't mean you're taking in the information. So to give you a purpose to read, we teach students some specific note structuring techniques that they can make the information more highly organized. And if it's really highly organized, it's easier to put in your long-term memory, and it's easier to pull back out of your long-term memory too.
Great.
Then the next step, everybody reviews, right? I mean, that's just part of preparing for an exam, but nobody self-tests because it's kind of painful to do. If you take a self-test and then you score it, you may have missed some, right? And that does not feel very good. But the beauty is, if you will do that before a teacher gives you a test, it gives you time to remediate, and you get to fill in any gaps, and you're going to end up with a much better grade if you will test yourself before the teacher tests you.
Right.
And then I know that for the MCAT prep work that you have done in the past, we've talked about this, that just because you've taken a test, your work is not done, is it? You need to score and analyze, what did I miss? Why did I miss that? In order to keep from making those same mistakes again.
Yeah. Yeah. And with MCAT in particular, we say analyze what you got right as well. Because one, if you only look at what you get wrong, the MCAT's already kind of disheartening test.
Yeah.
So it could be really upsetting. It can be disheartening. But also what we find with the MCAT is that some of what you got right wasn't based on content knowledge. It was critical reading or narrowing down. And that's great. That's an important part of the MCAT, particularly in cars, is your ability to read really nuanced, subtle answer choices where they all look kind of the same, except for maybe like one word. And sometimes you're not so much thinking, what do I think is right, as what does the MCAT think is right, and just thinking like the test. And part of that test analysis, so doing your self-test, but then doing the scoring and analysis, is figuring out when you did narrow it down and get to the right answer.
Right, exactly. And so we encourage students to keep testing themselves on the material until they get to 90%. I mean, you made the notes, right? So that's not unreasonable. And then you know you're ready to go, and you can quit studying whenever you're consistently getting the answers right. So again, that's often something that students have not built in to a study system. They think, you know, I will study until they hand me the test and then I'll quit or until I log into it. No, if you know the information and it's a day or two before the test, you're good. You can look over it again, but you do not have to sweat and worry if you have data that shows, I know this stuff.
Yeah. And conversely, I've seen people make a choice to review based on time. So I'm going to spend 2 weeks on each chapter, and there's 12 chapters. So there's a 24-week plan, but then not do this review test and score analysis and sort of thing. But I went through all the chapters, and I had a student once, I mean, in no disrespect to her, she was just really mentally stuck, where she was scoring like 124s, 125s on the MCAT. And when I said, I think this isn't just, you know, this isn't just critical reading, it's content. She was like, but I don't want to read the chapters again. I already did it. I'm like, well, you don't necessarily even have to read the chapters again, but you have to do something to work on what you're getting wrong. You can't just say, but I put in the time, right? Because it isn't really about the time, it's about the goal. So you might do time to help yourself do the work as you go, right? So that you were doing it in bite-sized pieces, but you got to keep going until you get to a number that you're happy with. You know, sometimes with the MCAT, we say 70 or 80% right is good enough. And 90 is obviously ideal. but the MCAT curve's pretty hard. So if you're getting 70 or 80% right, you're actually in pretty good shape.
Exactly. Yeah.
But you still have to find some metric that you're shooting for. Where do you think people fall down the most on this flow chart? Like, is there one? So I was talking about sticking points for the MCAT, but with studying for school, with studying for med school, do you think there's one particular box in this chart where they're the most likely to stumble?
It may be in the note making where you have to structure the information, because that's hard. It's easy to read, it's easy to answer questions, but doing the work of internalizing it and taking difficult concepts and translating them into something that's meaningful to you is hard work, and let's not pretend it's not. So I think it's probably in the middle box where it's structuring the content, but if students are willing to do that work, that's what embeds it in the long-term memory, right? Because there's a whole idea of desirable difficulty. If something's too easy, it just doesn't stick. Doesn't make any difference. But if you have to put some effort in, then it's more likely to stick with you for the long term.
Good. Okay.
And those are my books that I already mentioned.
All right. Study Without Stress, 6 Steps to College Success. There's, the other one is for nursing, right?
Right.
So these books, I mean, they're available really wherever booksellers go. I'm going to place a link in the chat, but if you go to nationalpremedday.com and then go to the speaker bio for Kathleen, you will see that all of her books are there in one place, so you can see what she has to offer.
Okay, thanks.
I know you covered some of this stuff before I got here, so I'll just keep kind of slowly going through slides unless you tell me to stop. Ooh.
Oh, yeah, let's talk about time, shall we?
Yeah.
I was actually with a group of faculty members earlier this week and was able to ask them if the average amount of time spent in either class or small group work, if that was an accurate range. And at their particular school, they said it was 26 hours a week. And so I think my 20 to 30 hours for med school requirements is definitely in the ballpark for that.
Yeah. This is amazing. Like, I look at this graph and I just think, like, I tend to not chart my life this organized, right? And you forget how many hours different things eat up. You know, this is a really nice concrete way to think about it.
Yeah. And I'd like to, point out that obviously you have more free time whenever you're in college, but there is time for other things even whenever you get to professional school. I know some students think that they imagine it as a time when they're like locked in a dark room studying 24 hours a day, and then the only thing they do other than that is take exams. And that's not what it's like at all, right? You have a real life, you have friends, you get to go and do things. And the more highly organized you are, the less you have to worry about time away from study, because you have a time and a place when you know that's going to happen.
Right.
And actually, Scott asked me something that I didn't get to fully address about how students can start preparing for professional school while they're still in college. And it's the things that we're talking about right now. Go ahead and learn how to prepare before you go to class. Get more out of lecture. Be more engaged. Learn how to test yourself and to think like a teacher, to think like an MCAT question might be asked. And you can do a lot of things while you're in college that are going to make you a much stronger applicant as well as med student.
Right. Yeah. And one of the things I hear from med students a lot is that no matter how strong their study skills were in college, they had to reinvent them in med school. So sometimes people will say to me, like, well, I don't know what study skills I need to build for med school. I'm like, it's much more about building self-awareness and, like you were saying, prep, because I mean, a lot of us have learned how to study online thanks to the pandemic, but often going from college to med school is the first time that you found that a lot of your lectures are video. And that might change. You know, are you watching on 2x just to get an idea of it and then watching slowly? I did Wharton data analytics 2 summers ago, and some of that math I had to watch on half X. You know, like, I'm good at math. I wouldn't say I'm quick at math. You know, and I was so grateful that I was watching on videos and not live, because you can't tell a real life professor to go at half X.
Yeah, right. Can you slow down, please? Yeah.
Oh, you know, and I pause them and make some notes and do the math problem and then hit play again. Oh, it was wonderful. I loved it. I mean, I think sometimes people complain about online, but I think it's an amazing way to learn. But yeah, one of the big things that really happens as you get further and further into your academic career, I find, is that flipped classroom model, where in class is less learning and more analysis of what we've learned. And, you know, for a long time in school, I skated by going to class and then doing the reading, and I found the reading more palatable because I'd already been in class, and you just can't keep up if you do it that way at some level. At some point, you get to where if you're continuing to do the pre-med med path, that just won't work for you anymore. Yeah, and it's a rude awakening when you think, oh, I thought I was pretty good at this, and now I have to find a whole new way to be good at it.
And I think the secret is what you just said, Rachel. It's self-awareness, and that is, and also then being able to quickly adjust instead of just hoping that things get better. I did bad on the first exam. I'm going to keep doing the same things and hope it gets better on the second exam. Please don't do that. That's not reasonable to even assume that that's going to happen.
Yeah. All right, let's keep toggling through a couple of these slides, and then I see we're getting some good questions in the audience too.
Yeah, I just want students to know every time I present this information, this is not something that I just made up or that I did myself in graduate school. This is all based on research that's been done over many decades and that we have tested on real live students for the last couple of decades.
Great. Oh, wait, did I go backwards?
No, you did not. I showed this multiple times because any student who works with me, I ask them to commit this to memory. And
repetition is learning.
It is. And we even do it as a chant where we do it repetitively. And so the secret there is whenever they sit down to study, I want a student to say, am I going to pre-read? Am I going to make notes? Am I going to review? Am I going to self-test? Am I going to score and analyze? And they're always going to do one of those activities. And so it really cuts down the amount of time it takes to really focus on the task in front of you because you have a limited number of activities that are going to move you forward.
I think that's brilliant. I love that. All right, guys, let's keep going.
That's it.
All right. So vitalstudyskills.com. We're not done with the session. We've got plenty of time for Q&A. That's just it for our slides. Hey, what's that flow chart, friends? What are you going to do the next time you sit down and study? Are you going to pre-read? Are you going to read and make notes? Are you going to self-test? Or are you going to score and analyze? I love that. Okay, I'm going to stop screen sharing for now. We can always bring that back up if we need a reference. Okay. Lots of questions in the audience. Let's start this. So Teffy she says, I found that taking notes traditionally doesn't always work for me. Are there other ways you can take notes that prove to be effective? What do you think?
Well, I'm going to assume that whenever the student says traditionally, that they mean just a sheet of paper where they're just writing words down a piece of paper. And of course, that's better than nothing. But let's talk about what the most effective note type is that has been found. And that is actually a matrix, or what we call a category chart. And that is where you have to impose organization. Well, like the time chart where I was comparing the college to the med school, that's a category chart. Anytime you compare things, that's going to help organize the information either as you're listening or as you're reading, and it's going to help your brain be able to absorb it better and then be able to pull it out better too. So try a category chart the next time you need to make a note on something.
I love that. Yeah, I'm a big fan of matrices and tables, so I'm glad to hear that I was intuitively getting to the right thing. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with Anki. Anki is huge in the MCAT and USMLE world these days. Abby asks, could making notes apply to making Anki cards? I've heard a lot of people swear by it. What do you think?
And absolutely, there's that is equivalent to what I would call a flashcard, where it's just question and answer. And there's definitely a time and a place for that. I think that type of tool tends to be overused by students, though, because it's very simple to make and it's very simple to use. But sometimes that removes, remember, that desirable difficulty. It removes that layer of deeper thinking that's required to really be able to understand something, make it truly your own, and put it in your long-term memory. So don't rely too heavily on any one tool would be my general advice. And then if you will look at what the task is, what it is that you're trying to learn, then you can better choose, is Anki going to be the best tool for me, or should I be making another type of note?
Great. Heather asks, what are your recommendations for how to go about self-testing as an undergraduate? I've always made my own test questions, but do you have recommendations to streamline this process? Well, first of all, congratulations that you're already making your own test questions. That's awesome.
Absolutely. Well, you're going to think that I only know one thing, but I'm going to mention category charts or the matrix again, because whenever you have that set up, you can just use a sheet of paper, or if you're doing it on your computer, just a box, and blank out all the insides. That leaves you with the column and the row headings. You refill it in again, either by hand or typing, and you've just self-tested over your notes.
Nice.
And it's already set up to do that. Isn't that brilliant?
That is so smart. So I'm just showing you guys the do you have the time, because this is an example of a category chart, right? It's a grid. Right? So it's got categories and then the different possible occurrences of the categories. So that when we're saying category chart or matrix, this is an example of what one looks like. So this one happens to be about time spent for studying, but it could be chemical processes or, whatever, right? Any, maybe it's a bunch of formula.
It could be.
Yeah. Okay,
and if students want to see a number of examples of them, the University of Michigan School of Medicine, if you go to their website and look at anatomy tables, someone has taken their entire anatomy course and made it into matrices or category charts.
That's amazing.
It is a thing of beauty. It's amazing.
Love that. Okay, cool. Let's see. Well, here's a tough one. So Boomer says, I do not have self-discipline and do not follow the schedule. Is it possible to overcome that?
Absolutely. Because we're not born doing that. It's just a skill. It's a habit, and absolutely you can. And I think I'm going to go back to what our very first speaker said this morning. Remember our keynote to Dr. Davis, the dedication, determination, and discipline. Those are skills that can be learned. And I suggest that you start small, that you don't start with a huge goal, but that you break it down into little small parts. And that's going to help you get some quick wins in, and it will help you build those skills and those habits. Because again, we're not born with them. These are all learned skills, and you can learn them too.
Great. Yeah, and I guess, Boomer, what I would add to that is, for me personally, helping pre-meds, I find that one way sometimes to help with discipline is not just to approach it from the tactical stuff that Kathleen's talking about breaking into pieces, but also to find your why. right? So if you are dreaming of being a doctor and that's what you're thinking about, it might be that your self-discipline comes from the 4 hours a week that you get to do clinical volunteering, right? And then you're with the patients, and then you remember, this is what I'm shooting for. This is why the hard work is worth it. And then, I mean, completely on a tactical side, I'm a big fan of the Pomodoro Technique. Like sometimes when I'm talking to pre-meds and they'll be like, well, just sit down and try to study for 4 hours and see how it goes.
No, please don't.
I mean, like on the one hand, I admire you, and on the other hand, that's crazy. Yeah, I'm a huge fan. I mean, and I'm not an expert on the Pomodoro Technique, but basically you work for 25 minutes, you get a 5-minute stretch break. I can do anything for 25 minutes. Right. So, I'll shut down all my extra tabs. I silence my phone, and I just, and then the success for me is the time. It's not what I got done. I can't, I was joking before about I'm a kind of slow math learner. If I tried to put time pressure on how long I needed to wrap my brain around a new math concept, I would feel like a failure a lot of the time. But if I just say, I'm going to do 25-minute increments for 2 hours, and we'll see how far I got at the end of those 4 Pomodoro chunks. That's totally reasonable. And maybe I need to study more than 2 hours that day, but I'm probably not going to think about more than 2 hours at a time, just so I don't overwhelm my brain. That's just me. Yeah.
Well, there's actually a good biological basis for what you're talking about, Rachel. And okay, everybody knows about circadian rhythms. That's our 24-hour rhythms, day and night. But there's also within the day something called Ultradian rhythms. And about every 1.5 to 2 hours, we have a period of peak alertness. And then we have what they call a trough of about 15 or 20 minutes when, you kind of feel like you need to take a break, you need to stretch, you're yawning, you're having trouble concentrating. And then that's followed by another period of alertness. And so you can set your study schedule around those naturally occurring rhythms to get the most out of your study time while still taking care of yourself, because you'll be having those breaks in between.
Okay, cool. That's great. Yeah, so follow-up from Boomer. How students find their own study habits and improve, or how do students find their own study habits and improve? I have an undergrad degree, but still couldn't find my efficient study habits. I feel like I'm lacking something that other people pick up.
Well, again, I happen to have written a book that would be helpful to you, because what we did was we looked at the research of what do you need to do to prepare before you listen to a lecture. What do you need to be doing during that time period while someone's talking and you're taking in information? What do you do with that information afterwards? And then how do you make sure that you really put that in your long-term memory? And so instead of reinventing the wheel, I suggest you go ahead and look through the strategies that we teach, work through them, apply them to a class. This is not theoretical, okay? This all needs to be applied to some real material. And see, because you are bringing strengths to this, but there are probably gaps too that need to be shored up along the way. And if you'll just start implementing each of these strategies, your strengths can become stronger and your weaknesses get filled in.
Right. So I'm not going to post this one up just so that it's not in the recording, but someone put another follow-up that said, is this laziness or a mixture of laziness and imposter syndrome? I don't think lazy is really a thing. There is a conscious choice that people make to do nothing, which I think is a wonderful form of self-care. My do nothing days are some of my most glorious days. But if you desperately want to and you're feeling stuck, I don't think that's laziness. It might be imposter syndrome. It might be ADHD. And no, I'm not diagnosing you over chat. I'm just giving examples of various reasons, and that's one of them. It could just be plain old fear. Fear is a lot like imposter syndrome, but I think especially for those of us that were gifted children, and I'm not going to try to go too far down the therapy bent here, but if you were a gifted child, you might have accidentally absorbed the idea that smart is a character trait, not something you work for. And then when you had to work hard later, you were worried that it meant you weren't smart. You're still smart. You have raw talent and ability. And I also know some people who are doctors who are certainly bright, but it's not so much that they're smart as that they had tons of grit. Those 3 Ds, the determination, discipline, and what was the other one?
Determination, discipline, dedication.
Dedication, right? Smart is helpful. Hard work is more important. And yeah, it can sometimes be really scary, right? Like you get this idea that I don't want to fail, so I'm not going to do it. And you might not be thinking that consciously, but somewhere in the back of your brain that might be happening. I think the thing you can remind yourself is that a C is better than a 0. You know, like just get in there. Just get in there and start doing it. It's okay if you're not perfect, right? You get better with practice. So, you know, I assume if one person asks that question, a lot of people are thinking it. And it's important to me that we shouldn't be beating ourselves up about this, you know. Here's an interesting one. I don't know if this is in your wheelhouse, Kathleen, but I'd love to tackle it. What if a student has a specific learning disability and is a slow reader?
Well, if you've been diagnosed with a certain learning disability, there may be accommodations for you either at your university or at your medical school. So please take advantage of those. And I was just thinking earlier today that what a mistake that a lot of students make in their thinking is that by watching a video, that's going to be a better use of their time than reading a textbook. So I'm going to put a plug in for reading textbooks and other written materials, because the speaking rate of most people is around 130, 150 words a minute. The very slowest reader in the whole world is around 300 words a minute, maybe between 2 and 3. Anyway, you can see it's considerably faster than listening, right? And so even if you consider yourself to be, or someone has said you're a slow reader, I had a student who had a reading disability and was working on his MD and PhD. And he said to me, I know I just have to put in a little bit more time than my classmates do. So you absolutely can do it. But if you need accommodations, please make sure you get those so you can be your most successful. Great.
Yep. Yeah. One of my favorite people here on YouTube is Hank Green. And Hank recently, he's an educator. You guys he might have taught you biology. He does like Crash Course and SciShow and stuff. And one of the things he always likes to remind people is that he has some reading issues and has an 8th grade reading level. You know, and he's an educator who has educated thousands of people. And part of why he's good at educating is that he's not a super strong reader, but he's still got a master's degree in biochemistry. I'm pretty sure he did some reading to get it.
Yeah.
Okay. So now, related to that, Carol asks, are there any tips on how to actively read faster? She says, I slow down a lot, I think is what she means, when I take notes while reading and would like to speed up my pace.
Well, the first thing is being focused on your reading is going to speed it up. And so what we recommend is that you estimate how long a page is going to take and then set a timer. And so you'll feel a little bit of pressure while you are reading to help you stay focused. And if you are taking notes while you are reading, no, it's just going to be slower. It just is. You can't read faster and make notes faster and comprehend all this, you know, just magically. But if you will do a quick pre-read, which is that very first box, right, before you go back and read it, that's going to help you read faster. You're going to understand more, and you're going to get a better set of notes. So I guess maybe the short answer is do a pre-read before you start reading, and that will speed things up for you.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the pre-read too. Yeah, like Brian Schnedeker, who some of you guys, depending on how long you've been in the MCAT prep world, might remember him from his days at Next Step Test Prep. He used to say, your first pass is just skimming to get idea of the concepts and to look at the pretty pictures.
That's right.
And I mean, that really resonated with me. Like it's years and years later, and I still think that that's a smart way to go about the first chapter.
It is.
Okay, so we still have, got to check my Kanban, I think 5 more minutes.
Okay. Well, can we go back and visit something that we were talking about a minute ago, Rachel?
Oh, definitely.
And then, again, this is a little more general, but I think it's important for students to know, the student who was, wondering about being lazy, an important concept that the Heath brothers have pointed out in their book, Switch, is that what looks like resistance is often just a lack of clarity, that you don't have that pinpoint focus of exactly what it is, the next step that you need to do. And so you just feel kind of stuck because you're not sure of the way forward. So just keep that in mind, that it could just be a lack of clarity as to what the next step is why you're feeling stuck.
Yeah, that's really smart. Yeah, what I would chime in on that, and I'm going to say the word ADHD again, and I'm not diagnosing anybody in this room with that. I don't actually have it, but what I have found is that ADHD coping skills are actually human coping skills. No. So there's a YouTube creator called How to ADHD. I think her first name's Jessica. So Jessica has a video about the wall of awful. Right. And like everyone's wall of awful is different. And I find that when I have my wall of awful, it's exactly what you just said, Kathleen. I'm not actually stuck on one task. I'm stuck on 500 tasks, and I can't decide which one is first. And I was fortunate enough in my life to actually have a really wonderful manager and mentor who was diagnosed with ADHD as an adult. So I think she's who turned me on to like these tricks work for everybody, whether you're neurodivergent or neurotypical. These are really smart coping tricks. And what she used to say was, Rachel, just pick one. Doesn't matter what you do. Pick one. Just pick a thing. And then after you've done one, you feel a little more successful. So maybe you need clarity on what to do. And maybe you just need to like not do paralysis by analysis. We got 3 minutes remaining. Any questions from the audience? Or Kathleen, any other points that you want to really hit home and make sure if they walk away with, what are they? I promised you not to make you only do 1 point. There are key points that you want to reiterate to our friends here. What are they?
Okay. She's saying that because before I was just like, oh no, I can only make 1 point. And there are a number of different things that you can do to be successful. And one of them, let's go back to being self-aware again. And if you truly know yourself and what your strengths are and are really honest with yourself about those, that is such a great place to get started, because then you know what you can rely on, and it helps you know what skills you need to still learn and still gain some strength in those areas. And so being self-aware, actually, again, in our day and age of busyness and continuous partial attention, is one of those things where you need to disconnect and be alone and quiet, which is not as common as it used to be, perhaps. And just do some self-reflection and think about you and your desires and what would your ideal life be like, and then that can give you some ideas of how you can tap into strengths you already have and move forward in those.
Yep, that's great. All right, well, we only have a minute left, but people have reiterated that I missed a question they really wanted me to get to. Okay, so how can we use the flowchart when self-studying for the MCAT? Do you want to sort of speak about this as the study expert, and then I'll take an MCAT pass real quick?
Oh, perfect. So I would recommend you use a flowchart anytime there's a process or a cycle, because that will be things moving from one step to another. And the way you self-test on that is you just cover up one piece at a time and then recreate that for the self-test part. Good question, Rachel.
Yeah, I think that's great. So I mentioned my friend Brian Schnedeker before. Somewhere on Student Doctor Net is a huge free self-study pan that he posted a few years ago. And it's like old MCAT, so the books, page numbers may not match. But he talks about this multi-pass system that is basically the same as Kathleen's study flow, which is you don't think about it for the entire test, right? You have to think chapter of a book at a time or concept at a time. So whether you're going through your Kaplan books or your Blueprint MCAT books, or maybe you're going through the WMC topic list, whatever it is, you take that one finite thing. Today I'm going to do waves, right? And then that's what the flowchart is for that concept. Right. And then what I personally think is great for the MCAT is not to do all the concepts in a row. Like I don't do all my physics and then all my chem and then all my bio, right? Do physics. And if you don't get a 90% when you do your self-test day, that doesn't mean you have to do more physics that second. Like I would do some review right now while it's fresh, but then, wait 2 hours, come back, wait 2 days, come back, wait 2 weeks, come back. At some point, you're going to have done enough times that it will be going from the long-term to the working memory.
Yes. Yeah. And research actually backs you up on that, Rachel, of not sticking with one thing, but mixing it up. They call it interleaving. Will actually build stronger neural connections than just sticking with something, you know, until you fall over.
I love when my instincts are right. I was just thinking it because the MCAT jumbles it all together.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like if you only think about chem or only think about physics on 2 completely different weeks, then your brain may not be prepared for the physical sciences section, which is asking you to do chem and physics and maybe even a little biochem all on the same day.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
All right. Well, we've run a minute over. That's not my strong suit, is on time. So I am super excited for our next session. But before we transition, I just want to say, Kathleen, thank you so much. I'm seeing a lot of heartfelt gratitude in the chat. I think you made a lot of people feel better today.
Good.